In this video, we're going to show you how to do a hip roof plan as you see here with dimensions. The hip roof itself will be on a hip layer, and the dimensions will be on a dimension layer. Once we create that, we're going to do the second part of the assignment, and that is to create a plot plan and then X-reference our hip roof into that plot plan. The first step of creating the hip, we need to change our units, and then we're going to create a couple layers called dimension and hip plan, and then we're going to create a dimension style called hip and adjust some of those settings, and then we can start the drawing process. So the first part is to change our units to architectural. So I'm going to type in units at the command prompt. And the drawing setup dialog box shows up, and what we want to make sure is that our units are set to architectural. In this case they already are. Our precision, let's change our precision in this case just to 0 feet - 0 inches, and we want to use decimal degrees, and our precision, let's change that to 0 as well. The next part of the assignment is to create a couple of layers, a layer called dimension with the color blue and a layer called hip plan. So let's go to our home tab of the ribbon, and we see the layer tool here under the layer panel. And currently we have a layer called 0, that's the default layer, and the layer 0 will always be in your drawings. Up at the top here we've got some buttons that will allow us to create a new layer. If I click on that, layer 1 is the default it shows. I'm going to go ahead and change that to dimensions. And I want to give it a color of blue. And the next layer I want to create is a layer called hip plan. And I'm going to change that to a color of white. With this background, I'm going to change my dimension from a blue to a cyan just so it will show up a little better. And what I'm going to do is make sure that hip plan is my current layer. And if I click on that, I can do a right click and I can set current, or I can click on that layer name and select this green checkbox tool there at the top. I'm going to dock my layer palette to the left, anchor it to the left I should say, so it'll show up on that side. The next part of the assignment is to create a dimension style called hip. So if I go to my annotate tab of my ribbon, we'll see the dimensions panel here, and there's a little button right there that we can select. And what I want to do here is create a dimension style called hip, and I want to make it do it a copy of the standard. So I'm going to select standard and then select new, and the name of this is hip. And I want to make sure that I start with the standard dimension style. So the first thing I want to do is change a few things around here. And as you can see at the top here, we've got lines, symbols and arrows, text, fit. There's different settings we can control to have our dimensions look a certain way and dimension a certain way. I'm going to go to the Symbols tab, and since this is an architectural drawing, instead of having those filled in arrows, I want to change that to architectural tick. So in this example, I'm going to override what the assignment says. I'm going to set our arrow size to 1/4 of an inch and our center marks to 1/4 of an inch as well. And I think that will be good here for the symbol and arrows tab. If we go to the text, we'll make sure we set the standard. Our text color is by block. Our fill color is none. The text height, we'll keep that at 1/4 inch as well. Let's put our text placement above the dimension lines. We want to make that center, left to right, the offset from the dimension. Let's make that 1/4 inch as well. And we want to, as far as the text alignment goes, we want to align with the dimension line. So as you can see right here, it's horizontal. If we align it to the dimension line, now the dimensions is in line with the object itself. The next part of this, we want to go to the fit, and I'm looking here at the assignment and what we need to select. On this page, the only thing we need to do is change the overall scale, and right now this is 1. I'm going to change that to 60. And what this 60 is going to do is all the settings we have here where there's a number, for instance, the arrow size, 1/4 inch, the center marks, 1/4 inch, that 60 is going to multiply those numbers. So in a case like this where we're working with a large floor plan, 1/4 inch in real units is not going to show up on a D-size sheet of paper, a 34 by 22. So that's why we have to increase scale those items up. And that's what that overall scale factor will do for us. If we go to our primary units, this is what controls the units that the dimensions will show up as. And they want us to go to unit format to change that to architectural. And I'm looking over here at the assignment on the left side. I think that's all we need to do on that page. So I think we're good here. Let's make sure that hip is current, and we see that it is. Current style is hip. So I think we're good to go. So if I go back to my Home tab, I can see that hip plan is the current layer. So if we look at the assignment here, we see a lot of dimensions they give us, and they're in architectural units. As far as the lines on the roof, they don't give us that, but we'll worry about that in a second. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to sketch the outside of the shape. So I'm going to go in the line command, and I'm going to pick a point any place, and I'm going to drag it straight up. And if I turn my ortho on, to turn ortho mode on, you can either select this button down here on the status bar, or you can hit your F8 key, either or. Once my ortho is on, I'm going to drag it straight up, and I'm going to type in 23 feet and hit enter. And when I do that, part of my drawing is off the screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a zoom out. I can double click on my wheel mouse to do that. And then I'm going to scroll out a little bit. So sometimes when you start AutoCAD, it's only zoomed into a small portion of the drawing area. So now that I've got my first line there, I'll go ahead and go back into my line command. And with my O-Snap on, I can select that endpoint and I can drag to the right. And this one is 49 feet. Looks like we're coming down 25 feet. And you gotta make sure when you do this, you're typing in that foot symbol. And we come across 15 feet. I go up, and I drag up 6 feet. I drag to the left 22 feet and type in 22 foot and then enter. I drag it down and I type in 4 foot and enter. And then I can either drag and type in 12 feet, or I can just close up with that line there. So we have the outside shape of that hip roof right now. Now we've got to draw those lines, and if I drag the assignment back on to our screen here just for a second, they really don't give us a lot of dimensions. One thing they do give us though is this angle line here, 45. So what we can assume that these are all in 45-degree increments, and that helps us out. It doesn't really spell that out, but that is the case. So one trick we can do is to come down here. We've done ortho before, and to the right of ortho there's another button that's called polar tracking. And if I hit that drop down arrow to the right of that symbol, it gives us angle increments that we can select, that we can lock to as we draw. Right now mine's set to 30, 60, 90, 120. I would like to have my lines drawn in increments of 45 degrees. So I'm going to select the 45, 90, 135, 180. And once I do that, my polar tracking is now on. So what that does for me, if I go into my line command and I pick a point, I can go at 0. The next angle that I can go to and snap to is at 45. And you know you snap to it when you see a little green dotted line there. It kind of has a magnetic feel. It snaps. Then I can go up to 90, over to 135, 180, and so on. So what I'm going to do is, if I go into the line command, I'm going to select the lower left corner at this point here. I don't know where this ends, but I'm going to overshoot it just a little bit. Actually, in this case, quite a bit. And I'll worry about the exact distance later when I go to trim it up. If I hit enter, I go back into my line command, then I select this point, and then I snap in the opposite direction. And just for the effect, I'm going to go way, way past it. So that's what we have here. So the idea here is once we draw these, we can then come back in later and trim those out. And if I come up here to the Modify tab, we've got a Trim button. I can select that. Select those two lines, hit Enter, and trim that. So that's how we're going to attack this. I want to go through right now and draw those lines from each corner. And again, I'm going to go past where I really need to be, and I'll worry about trimming later. I'll do the same thing on this corner here. And these two corners here. And then I'll go back into my trim command and select these two lines. And I did forget another 45-degree angle line I got to do. Actually, I forgot two. I'll do this one. And before you click, you got to make sure that that green dotted line shows up. That lets you know that you're on the correct angle. There's my green dotted line. So now I can go ahead and go into my line command. In this case, I want to start drawing straight lines up. And again, I'm going further than I need to. So now I'm going to go in and trim. I'll trim this two lines here. I'll come back in and trim, and I've got these two lines to trim up. So now I'll go back in to the line command, select this point, and I need to go 45 to here. Go out of the line command, go back into it, select this point as a start point. Go 135 degrees. And let's go ahead and trim this up here so we can kind of see what we've got. I'm going to select all those lines to trim, and with the crossing window I can trim all these at once. Now I can just put that last line in there. And we've got our hip roof. I'm looking at the assignment, and I think that's all we need as far as drawing the outside of that. The next part of the assignment is to put the dimensions on. So let's change our layer to dimension. So we select the dimension, and then we set a current. So now everything that we draw on will be on the dimension layer. I've got my linear dimension button here that I'll select. Let's just do the top one right off. Let's see what the dimension looks like. There's the 49 feet. If I hit enter again, that takes me back into that command, and I'm just going to start putting in some dimensions. I've got a couple screens here, so I'm looking off to the side here about, it should be, there's a 25. You could also hit enter and select the object it'll draw as well. I was selecting the 2 points first. You can do either or. One thing that we can do here on the bottom is do some continuous dimensions. And the first thing we need to do is go to back into the linear, and we have to select it point by point. So I'm going to go from left to right and get that initial dimension in. Once I have that, I can go back up to the Continue button under the Dimension panel, click that, and it remembers where I left off. I can select this one, and I'm still in it, and then select that one, and then escape to escape out of that. The next thing we need to do is put in the angular dimensions. And from the Dimensions tab, we can select the drop down to the right of Linear and do Angular. And here it's asking us to select arc, circle, or line. We've got two lines right here that I can select. So I'll select this line and this line. So in this case, the dimension that we see here shows the architectural arrow ticks. The assignment has closed arrows. I'm just going to leave it like this. The next two angular dimensions are a little bit different in that we don't have two lines really that we can draw. So what we're going to do is go back up into Angular. And if we look down the command line, one of those options is to specify the vertex. And if we hit enter, we can go into that mode. So now it says specify the angle vertex, which in this case is this point here. Specify the first angle endpoint, which would be this intersection. And then the next angle endpoint. I don't have an endpoint, but if I have my ortho on, I can just pick a point out here, or I can pick the intersection of the arrow and that line. And there I have the 135. I hit enter, and I'll be able to do the same thing with this one. I want to hit enter again to specify the vertex. There's my first point, and here I'm just going to pick right there, and it shows us that dimension. I'm trying to place it similar to what they've got. So in this portion of the assignment, we're showing you how to create a couple of layers, the dimension and the hip layer, and then we are going to draw the objects. Once the objects are drawn, we're going to put those dimensions on.